This time I have another Sony Beta machine. This time it's an SL2710. This was the third Beta Hi-Fi machine that Sony made. SL5200 was the first, SL2700 was the second, and the SL2710 the third. Sony learned a lot of things about the 2700, like it was too complex and too expensive. They wanted to make one that more people can afford, and this is the result. This is a Sony Betamax SL2710. This is the third Beta Hi-Fi machine that Sony released. The first Beta Hi-Fi machine is the SL5200, which I have. The second Beta Hi-Fi machine, which is the SL2700, which I also have. And this one here came in for service. This is the SL2710. And they made some improvements over the 2700 because they listened to people. Customers. And they only did it, I think, for this model. If memory serves me correct, this is the only one that they did it with. The complaint initially that came out from customers, I had to deal with these people at work. You know who they are. Those that like to whine and complain about everything. And when the front-loading machines came out, the first thing they whined and complained about was not being able to see how much tape was left without removing the tape. They'd been used to top-loading machines where they could just look down at the tape and see how much tape was left. And they could estimate, based on how much tape was left, as to whether they had enough tape to record their next show. It seems like a simple thing, but people complained when the SL2500 and the SL2700 were released and they didn't have that window. I think they complained about the 5000 as well, the 5000 series. But anyway, the prior machines that were top loading, you could see the tapes. You could see the tape. So Sony released this machine with the window. And believe it or not, that was a selling feature. I remember in the sales floor when people were showing the various machines and someone would say, well, why should I buy this one over that one? Well, it's got the window. You can see how much tape remains. Oh. It was a selling feature. I would call it a useless selling feature, but it was a feature that people at the time liked. But these machines here were actually not bad machines. They're all getting a little bit long in the tooth now. This one has a loading problem, apparently. That's why I'm not even going to try to load anything until I take the machine apart. The screws are loose on here, so someone has been into this machine. At this point, I don't know whether I'm able to do anything on it or not because there's gears that break on these ones and they're not the same gears as the other one. This is a similar loading mechanism but not quite the same, but very similar. It's our standard 711 chassis. I'm just inspecting to see the unit itself. Apparently the tape goes down at an angle, so I want to remove the cassette basket and just see if there's any broken arms on it, because the arms on these ones had a tendency to break. So before I even try to load up a tape, I want to check out the front loader. So I'm going to remove a couple screws from the front here and lift the cassette basket out. Namely this one. These also use JIS screws. They're one of the first machines that I think that we had with the JIS screws. So I actually had a special screwdriver that Sony gave me to take out the screws, but a number 1 Phillips is usually pretty good. These Pick Quick bits, the P1 fits them okay. Sony are good at marking with arrows the screws that you need to remove. I also have to pop the front bezel off a bit just to clear the basket here, and then I can lift the basket out. I think I got all the screws on this. Of course not, there's one more right down here. There's a arrow that points to a screw right down there that needs to come out. You can put a cutaway there for the screwdriver to fit down. Now the basket will just lift right on out. Gotta undo these plugs. Forgot about that. I gotta unplug this one. Just the switches on the front here. Unplug. There, now we can inspect the loader. This is completely different than the prior ones, and sometimes these arms break. Hopefully these gears aren't broken. That gear might be broken there. We'll have to inspect that a little closer. And these ones are completely different. These gears, there's these like two pieces to each of these gears, and they did split. And unlike the other one, which I've got a replacement for the other basket, this one here, I don't have any replacement gears for this one. If they're broken, I may not be able to do anything other than to try to make it load. But this one might be a lost cause if the gears are shattered, which was quite common on these units. So I'll push the tape through manually just to see what it does. So when you push the tape in, first thing it does is it activates these two switches on the side here. There's two switches, and they both have to activate before anything happens. That turns on the loading motor, which will then pull the tape in. And I just want to run this through the process manually here, just to see what it does. Okay, so the tape is starting to drop on one side, but this side is not dropping. And now it does. Is this broken? This gear might be broken. Wait a minute. Yeah, the gear's missing. There's a plastic gear that goes from one side to the other. That gear is missing, and that gear is probably split. There's where our fault is. We've got a broken gear.
And I know damn well that gear was on there when I pulled the basket out. Aha! There it is.
I didn't think that gear was missing when I took it out, but it's right here. It fell off. I guess when I was turning this around, it fell off. It's cracked. Right down the middle here. There's a crack in it. So what happens is it opens up and it falls right off. So we can try to epoxy this piece of gear back on. It's full of grease, so we're going to have to clear the grease off, but I could try to put it back onto the shaft here, and hopefully it will glue on. Pull it out from this side. I can remove this end gear here from this side. This side clips on. And we'll try to glue this other one back on this side of the shaft. But that's what's happened on here. Is this gear is just, it's fallen off. It's slipped off, and it's basically got out of time. So we'll try to glue this gear back on, and hopefully this thing will extend its life a little bit. I'm gonna have to clean this up because it's got all kinds of grease on it. So epoxy and so forth is not going to stick to it when it's covered in grease. So let me get this cleaned up, and then we'll try to glue it and see whether I can get this one to work. So I'm choosing isopropyl to clean out the inner diameter of the gear, and of course the shaft. Next I will mix up some epoxy. This stuff's called cold weld. It's the same as JV weld. It's just a two-part epoxy. I'm just going to mix a couple of equal parts of the hardener and the resin. It's got metal, steel reinforced, so the stuff's pretty strong. And then we just need to mix it thoroughly together. It'll turn a uniform gray color. So the two radio stations we lost yesterday they were playing that message telling everybody that they were off the air. As of today, the transmitters are completely shut down, no carrier, nothing. There was actually a third one in Calgary, which was also one of the comedy stations, basically ran the same thing as 1040. They're in Calgary on 1060, and they are now quiet too. I heard that they had the message playing. I was able to pick that up last night on my ham rig. They had the message playing last night. I was able to tune it in. I'm sure tonight, when the conditions are good for DX, it will be also off air, like 1040 and 1410. Which is too bad. The radio station at 1410 used to be one of the most popular stations in the city. They've been on the air for 100 years. Actually 101 years. They went on the air in 1922. Many famous disc jockeys like Red Robinson, Fred Latremole, Terry David Mulligan, in Canada, very famous disc jockeys, all worked at that station back in the 60s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. And basically what happened was they were too successful, and they started selling so many commercials that it just turned listeners off. And of course the new kid in town at the time was the FM band, and everybody ended up going to FM, and AM just kind of faded away. And it's unfortunate because it is the only band that's got long range, but it seems to be that there's not much left. News, traffic, and a couple sports channels, and a lot of foreign language stuff, but other than that, there's not really a lot remaining on the AM band anymore. Which is why so many radio collectors like myself, we built our own little low power AM transmitters. I'm just putting this around the outside here to support it, to give me some more strength, lateral strength. We built our own little half watt or quarter watt AM transmitters, just for the sole purpose that we can play music through them and enjoy our old vintage radios, because there's not a heck of a lot else that you can pick up these days. It's quite it's actually quite sad that the radio band has gone the way it has for radio enthusiasts. Okay, let's just put this piece back in here before this stuff sets up. Get glue all over myself. I may have to sand this down if it won't fit, but I just want to make sure that I've got a good, even, uniform coat on here, just to try to make this as strong as I can. Because I can always sand it down if it won't fit. Alright, I'm going to let this stuff set up. Starting to set already. It's getting to be quite thick and viscous. So we're going to let it set up, and once it's set up, I'll file it down and we'll see if it works. Clean up my tools here, my bench, scrape this crap off before it dries. And I'll go have lunch and let this set up for a few hours and we'll see what happens. Alright, it's been drying for a while. I just went out and got gouged for my lunch. I don't know how places can justify increasing their costs like they did, but they did it. Went out to Five Guys today and their price went up by about $2. Over $2 since the last time I was there. Which I mean hasn't been recently, so it was a while back, but yeah, prices are certainly creeping upwards on everything. So that looks like that could fit just like that. Perfect. Okay, let's try to put the other piece back on. We'll pull the mechanism all the way forward here, make sure everything is in the ejected position, and we'll put this other gear back on. This goes on like this. It only goes on one way, so I have to line it up before I put it in place, or it won't work. I think I got it. I'll just push this together and see if it'll click in place. Snap it in if I can. There, I think it's clicked in place. I think that's in place there. Okay, let's try manually putting a tape through and just see what it does. So push the tape in, push it forward, and then we'll just turn the mechanism. And the tape drops. So make sure it's dropping all the way down and that it drops down straight. Okay, that should be all the way down now. I think it's all the way down. Looks like it's pretty much down. Tape's all the way down. Now we'll bring the tape up. By pulling the belt, and it should start to lift. And the lid's open. Both lids open. There's two lids on the back here. And the tape ejects. There. As you notice, it's a split lid on the back here, so there's a gear on this side that opens both of them at the same time. It was kind of a dumb design, you know, thinking, oh, it's cool, double doors. Yeah, double doors to get out of alignment and jam and get caught on things. So this was very short-lived. In fact, I think this was probably the only deck that they did this with, because if you remember the 2700 and the 2500, they both had a metal door and then another door that slid up behind it to block putting a tape in. And then they went to this design, and then they went to the single flap, because these caused lots of problems. Like that gear across the top on the 2500 and 2700, the plastic gears would break. They were problematic. So say these machines, they had their issues, let's just say. Okay, let's mount the front loader back in and see whether this one will work. So the one of these screws is slightly longer than the others. It's that one. Okay, let's try it out. Power on. Okay, we're going into a shutdown mode because it appears that the tape is not being taken up. If we look down here at the capstan, it's binding up. So if I go to fast forward, it works. Go to rewind, it works. If we go to play, it's freezing up. So that's likely the pendulum gear that's need to be serviced on this. So let's just eject the tape. That part's working. Pendulum gear down here is likely sticking. Or the motor itself. So to get to that, I have to pull the bottom off the unit. Again, they're JIS screws, but I can put this bit in my power driver to remove them because these ones are in very tight. They're designed to hold the board open, but they're very brittle now. So I need to take out the real table assembly so I can get to the motor to lubricate it, because I think the bearing is probably dry on that one. Light's bending. That's why I keep wondering why it keeps leaning over towards me. The bracket's actually bending slightly on it. Lift off the cover a little bit so I can lift the motor assembly up. This just lifts out. Turn it over, and here we have the pendulum gear, and this is what usually gets gummed up. Because on fast forward and rewind, the torque is higher, so there's no problem. But what happens on play is that the torque is low, and it tends to stick sometimes. So usually what happens is the lubricant on the rotor here gets kind of dry. So we'll remove the pendulum gear, and we'll lubricate the rotor and the bearing here. To get the rotor out, I actually have to remove the reel tables because they're going to hold the rotor in place. The rotor will just lift off once I remove the reel tables. I gotta be careful because these plastic parts are just going to get really brittle, so I gotta really be careful when trying to remove these to prevent any damage. Little ball bearing on there, on that one. I don't want to loosen it over here because that's where the back tension is set. So I just want to do that, and then I should be able to lift this up and pull the gear out of here, or pull the reel table out. You notice there's an optical sensor on the bottom here. This is a rotation sensor. There's one right there that monitors it turning. The same with this one. An optical sensor on this side as well, right there. Okay. Now I can lift the motor apart. It'll just pop apart. It's just held in place with the magnetic field holding it down, like that. I'm going to want to put a little bit of oil right onto the bearing there, and then I can put this back together. Okay. Won't hurt to put a drop of oil onto the ball bearings here either, on each side. And then put the tables back on. Alright, that's the real table. It is now ready to go back in. It just sits in place. There's nothing real fancy about this. Puts it like that. And the board goes back on. My confidence is pretty high that this is going to fix the problem, so I'm going to put the base on it right now without even testing it, because I'm pretty confident that it's going to work. Get the old screw gun out again. And please don't lecture me about JIS screws versus Phillips screws. I do know the difference. I don't have a JIS bit. So this is the way it's going to have to be. Not for this size. This is actually the screwdriver we had from Sony at the time was what they called it, the engineer screwdriver.
About a foot long, had a wooden handle.
Specifically for these screws, because nothing else would do. Because if you guys think I give a rat's ass if I strip a screw on a 40-year-old VCR, taking it apart and putting it together, then I got news for you. I don't. Alright, let's see if this works. Power on. My concern is that gear holds up, because that would be an unobtainable gear, I think. Another one working. One thing I always advise with these machines is when you've got a machine, especially an old one like this, where parts can start to get a bit sticky on them, it's always a good idea when you first load one of these beta machines up, when you're gonna, before you play a tape, just hit the fast forward for a second just to make sure that everything is going to be working smoothly. Never hurts. So we got fast forward. I'll hold down the fast forward button while I'm in fast forward. It goes into what they call skip scan. That was for sampling, so you could hit fast forward. Oh, that's not fast forward, that was pause. Fast forward while you're going forward, and it will then give you a picture. Same as when you're in rewind. You could hit the rewind button and you get a picture. And then when you're in play, of course, they called it beta scan, beta skip, right? But as you can see, this one's capstan driven. When you're beta scan, beta skip, it's capstan driven as opposed to free running. So it tends to give you a little better picture. With the lines aren't moving through the picture, they're stationary. If I hit pause, this machine had a good freeze frame. This was what the 3 heads did for these machines. They gave you a rock stable freeze frame. And some of them would have slow-mo. This one I don't think has slow-mo. This has just got freeze. The 2700 had the slow-mo. Go back to play. There we go, play. And then back to pause. And it switches to the other A head. So we're looking at the same field displayed twice. This is the head that I put in that SL2710 yesterday. Would have been the same head that this would use. That's me, by the way, getting my hand close to the head, picking up interference from the plasma. Anyway, there it is. It's playing. It's looking good. I'll show you guys the front of this machine. I have to be quite careful with those Lounge V images because I've had copyright strikes and had my videos demonetized because I used a few seconds of their images. Even though Lounge V says you're able to use it's content that's on YouTube and it's licensed for public performance. Basically, they write in their license, it says you can display these images in your dentist's office or your doctor's office, or you can use them in your retail store to help you sell televisions. You can do whatever you want with them, except for you can't repost them on social media. Kind of a stupid license. So I gotta be careful whenever I show those images. On the front here, so this had a volume control for the record level for the hi-fi audio track, and the front little flip down panel that locked in place where you could select your tuner input line audio, which is for simulcast, where it would record the picture off the tuner input but the sound off the line input, or PCM mode, line PCM. Line input, PCM, there's a switch on it for that. And that was, where was that switch? There was a switch on here somewhere. Is it this one? Beta Hi-Fi with the MPX filter. Okay. There's a switch on here. And it might be on the back on this one. There's a switch for PCM. What it does is it disables the dropout compensator. And what that's for is if you're using it with a PCM audio processor. PCM audio processors record. What it would do is it took analog audio, stereo analog audio, and it digitized it into basically a video frame to represent 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz sample rate. And it formatted as a video frame that will be recorded by the video head. Now, people confuse that with hi-fi. Hi-fi audio was AFM, analog frequency modulation, which was good, but it wasn't digital. PCM was full digital, where you used the full width of the tape, but you weren't recording it as an analog FM carrier. I guess in a sense you were, because the video carrier is an analog FM carrier, but it's also much higher bandwidth than the AFM narrowband FM tracks used for Beta Hi-Fi. So it allowed true CD quality to be recorded on a cassette, and that was done a lot in the 80s before digital audio tape was developed. So you had a switch on the front here to select PCM, or actually a switch on the back. Record mode, beta 2, beta 3. Dimmer for the fluorescent display. Record balance, it has an audio dub function that's used to dub new audio in on the linear soundtrack only. And then on playback, you've got your audio out. Stereo, you can pick the left channel only from a hi-fi track, the right channel only, or stereo. And then you could also select the beta hi-fi. You could select the linear non-hi-fi track, or you could mix the two of them together. What that was useful for is if you went out and shot your home movie, your home video on beta, and edited it on beta so that your soundtrack was on the hi-fi audio, you could go back, plug a microphone in, go back after the fact, press the audio dub function, dub your sound in. You can do your narration to go with whatever was on the video, and then when you played it back, you could select mix, and you would hear the native audio playing off the hi-fi track as well as the dubbed audio playing off the linear track. That was about all that was any good for. All these other buttons on here for setting the time, set the clock, and if you wanted to set the timer. This was made it quite simple, because if you had set the clock, which you did by pressing the clock button, and then you would set the clock, so say 2:08, I think I got to do this, I got to hold it down maybe? I forget how to do this. Oh, I got to set the day first. So today is Thursday, and then I hit next, and then I hit the time, so 0208, next, and then AM or PM, or PM. It was quite the simple unit to set up, because to set it to record something, you would basically press the timer set button. You probably do it with it playing still. Timer set, event number 1. It would ask me what day it was on. So if it was on every day, for example, or this week or next week, say I wanted to record something Friday, hit Friday, okay? Or was that's the event number. Event number 1. Oh, here it is. Event, day, turn on, turn off, and channel. So event. Next is the day. So if it was on, say, Saturday, I'd hit Saturday. That would be Saturday this week. This week. Or if it was Saturday next week, I'd hit Saturday next week. And it shows up on here. I'll show you guys the display. So you see it says this week. If I push next week, it's next week. If it's something on every day, I would hit every day. And it would record every day. If it was on, say, Saturday this week, I'd hit Saturday this week, and then I'd press next, and then I would enter the time. If it was on at, say, 6 p.m., I'd enter 6:00. Oh, that's the day. There you go. Turn on time. 06:00 p.m. Next, and then the off time, 07:00 p.m. Next, and then I would select the channel that it was on, say channel 12. Next. There we go. And I have to have this in tuner first of all. There we go. There. So now it's done. And then I would just hit the timer on-off button over here, and that would set it to record at that time. Again, that was old school. This is before we had on-screen display. So having the direct entry made it easier for people, although if this was installed under the TV, you're getting down on your hands and knees, and didn't go over well with old people wearing glasses, having to look down at the screen and push buttons. They wanted remote programming, which followed shortly, but anyway, that was this. It was supposed to make it easier. And then Sony came out with one called I think it was the SL2410. It was a mono machine, which would actually talk, and you'd push all the buttons like this, and then it would a little button that says announce, and it would actually say event 1 Saturday next week, on time 6 p.m. off time 7 p.m. see flashing channel, and the channel would be flashing to tell you what channel it was set to. That was another way that they tried to make setting the time and setting the recordings easier, because that seemed to be the biggest headache for people back in the day, was setting up their VCR to record. That closes up just by doing that. And see, this one's pretty much done. I'm just letting it play here, making sure everything's still good. Okay, I would say that this one is done. I'll throw the top on it. Get this one ready to ship back across the country again. This one came in from back east. And hopefully this will last for a while. Because, as I say, that gear is the only, well, not just that gear. There's all the other gears, right? That one probably won't break again, but one of the ones on the other side easily could. Those nylon gears were brittle when they were new, and 40 years later, I don't think they've gotten any better. You notice when I put the tape on, I always kind of push it in with one finger in the middle and just kind of help it in. I always do that on these old mechanisms just to avoid any stress. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye.